Yeah.
I've been in some. I was an EMT too, so like I'm good in like
I didn't need
high
CPR.
anxiety situations. I was just like, I was like, "Are you okay?" You're like, "My foot's caught. My foot's caught." The machine was still running. I think
Yeah.
at that point, gas was like pouring out.
All right, man. Well, episode 3 here for the Hunter podcast. And I would have to say we kind of kicked off the 21 season with some action this past
right
weekend. Some good, some
Wrong
bad.
kind of action, probably. But
Some good,
bad.
some bad. But we went down to Kentucky this past weekend and visited the new lease that we've got down there, just over 350 acres. And I guess, I mean, what was your thought going into this property? Like, we had obviously looked at the maps and topo maps, but and you've heard me kind of describe it. I've only been on it a little bit, but what was your I guess anticipation of what this thing was going to be like, and then how did that kind of feel once you got feet on the ground?
Oh, I think it was pretty similar to, because you had been down there once already, and you've got a place in Kentucky too, and so I had a notion that it's big timber ridges, and that the properties hunt quite a bit bigger than what you would think of 350 acres of where I'm used to hunting is Ohio. It feels much bigger and hunts much bigger in a place like Kentucky.
Yeah.
That said, I also think that there's not as concentrated amounts of habitat. So there was parts of that property that felt kind of desolate, or it's like as you're, might travel across this area, but it's not necessarily it's not a thicket, it's not a core area, it's not, so we had to bounce around a few different areas of the property. And as luck would have it, I imagine this is like a lot of places. All the best spots seems to be kind of on the property lines.
For sure.
I guess we're still trying to figure out if that's just what we're perceiving or
spots,
if that's the reality. But
yeah,
it's a learning experience for me for sure in having to figure out. Like I said, there's no fields there. There's not a lot other than terrain and timber, and so we're just kind of looking for terrain features and trying to figure out what types of places on the property we should be looking for. And I think we learned quite a bit while we were down there.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things, and I'll lay down this gauntlet for anyone that's listening to kind of challenge me on it, but I truly believe that hunting big pieces of timber like this lease, doesn't matter what state you're in, will ultimately make you a better deer hunter overall. Because you don't have natural breaks of field, because you don't have
quit.
Yeah, that's very possible. I mean, we don't know. We know there's at least one shooter buck on this property that made it through. I assume that there's a lot more. That said, I mean, this place is a bitch. Yeah. It's not going to be easy to hunt. In multiple ways. Number one is, you look straight up a shelf and you're thinking, man, like, how am I going to get up to the top here? Yeah, that's not the top. There's then another shelf and then another shelf above it. Yeah. And so number one is you're going to have to be in shape to get through this, because if you just ride your four-wheeler or whatever back up in there, you're blowing out every deer within, the entire hillside.
Yeah.
I think number two is, even if you are in shape and you're willing to, walk a mile and a half to the back corners of this property, which we'll talk about here, the access to it without bumping deer is extremely difficult.
Tough.
There's a reason that there are big bucks living in these hills and hollers, and it's because it's not easy to hunt.
Yeah. Not a lot of people getting back up in there, I don't think. Some of these roads, as we'll get into, probably haven't been walked on or ridden in 10, 15 years, probably.
Yeah, so, I mean, let's get into it. We went down on Friday.
Before we get too far into the property, let's maybe give a little bit of pretext about where it's at, how we found it.
For sure.
Why we picked this one up. And
absolutely. So I've got 75 acres in the same county.
Menifee
County, Kentucky. And if anybody knows east central Kentucky, we're not too far from Cave Run Lake, which is a really popular lake, but you're in the mountains and hollers. There's no farmland. It's steep hollers, it's deep terrains, it's big timber.
And that's just the Appalachian Mountains.
Appalachian Mountains. And in fact, a lot of it around that area is Daniel Boone National Forest, right? So public land hunting. The big thing in this county, at least, is Kentucky has gone through and kind of classified the state into different zones, right? So zone 1 through 4. Zone 1 is pretty pretty much the most populous deer areas. It's almost unlimited harvest of does in those areas. They need to work on the numbers. Whereas Zone 4 quality counties basically have had some sort of issue in the past that deer populations remain low, and thus there's heavier restrictions. So Menifee County kind of sits isolated as a Zone 4 and has for several years. And what that means is, just like the rest of the state, we can only kill one buck, but we also can only kill a doe with a bow or crossbow through most of the season. And there's only 2 days of firearm season, and it's actually 2 days in the late muzzleloader season, which is in December, that you can shoot a doe, a single doe. And so what happened is years ago, and fortunately our landowner that we're leasing off of is one of the wardens in the area, is basically that they got hit really hard with EHD in 2012, as did much of the whitetail range. The population decreased significantly. Prior to that, the hunting population was hot and heavy, right? I mean, people lined Daniel Boone National Forest. They shot a ton of deer. There was a high deer kill because you could shoot buck or doe during rifle season, which typically falls right along the prime rut. When that EHD hit and they moved it to a Zone 4, now anybody during the rifle season can't shoot a doe. So what happened is a lot of those hunters said, well, I'm just going to go the county over and I can go and shoot does during gun season. So if I want to shoot a doe, I have that opportunity. If I see a buck, I can shoot a buck. And so the hunting pressure plummeted. Well, anytime the hunting pressure plummets, you usually start to see better deer, better age classes. And so this was, I think, about 7 years ago. And, there are, I believe, still a pretty healthy population at this point. But, we're still sitting in that Zone 4 restriction. And because such, I know personally, I bought that place in Menifee County in 2019. So that fall of 2019 was the first deer season that I had my 75 acres. And, I had 4 or 5 different bucks that I thought were 4.5 or older on that property, using that property, not necessarily living on it, which we're talking mountain deer. And I mean, these deer travel. And so
these are just on a couple feeders you got out
just
behind
on a couple feeders.
your
Yeah, same thing, just ridges and timber and acorns.
Yeah.
So
and your place is about 15 minutes, if I remember the drive correctly, from this new lease.
Which is one of the reasons we really picked it up. I mean, being that we have a place that we can stay and station up and in 15 minutes be over to this property,
and the fact that you've got a reason to be
easier
down there besides just going to hunt the lease is an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, Emily and the kids and I are down there, every 2 weeks or so at the cabin, whether we're, hunting or fishing or on the lake boating and stuff.
Yeah, man, it's a cool area too. I know when we were down here last week and checking out some of the arrowheads and the
all the flint
stuff that Emily found up under these caves. It's really, really cool country with a lot of like Indian heritage and stuff. It was.
So the cool part about this area, and just south of us is a place called Red River Gorge, and they've got all of these basically large rock overhangs. And so these overhangs essentially stay dry 365 days a year. And you go underneath it, and I mean, it literally is like dust. It's never, there's no compensation or decomposition. There's nothing there that actually processes and moves forward. And so this is where a lot of these camps, from the times of Indians through the Civil War, all set up. And so there's this history around that. In fact, we found, like a piece of burnt antler, in one of these rock shelters just recently, and it's cool when you find something like that because you're like, man, is this 100 years old? Is it 500 years old? You just don't know. And Emily and the kids have found a lot of really cool flint broadheads in those areas and stuff, and
it just
tips.
Really connects you to the property itself and the idea of hunting. And it's like, man, we're not the first ones here. Indians squatted right under this rock and worked on their broadheads, as we're screwing ours on and heading out to our tree stands. It's like,
it's crazy to think that. I mean, every time we're down there and you look at these, and obviously now there's a network of roads, the lake has different launch points and stuff. But if you try to strip that all away in your mind and look at this thing in a raw format, you're like, where would you be? Like, what would draw you to this particular place? At that time, because Cave Run is a man-made reservoir, it was a river at the time. And so, okay, I got a river here, I've got these bluffs here, but it literally is it's a very tight string of kind of mountainous hills and hollers, because we went not too far north of my cabin and we're back into farm country, more rolling hills and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, you're trying to look at those advantages and how people are doing things like that. And yeah, it really takes you back to be like, these guys had a tough life, and you could see how valuable a rock shelter could be. Right now we're sitting with 10 inches of snow outside.
That's all there is, man. It's endless timber ridges and caves.
Yes. So, I think with my, I've hunted a lot. I grew up hunting in kind of big timber. I hunted a lot of farmland as well. But one thing that always kind of gets me excited is when you have a big piece of timber like that adjoins and contiguous with a lot of other big pieces of timber, the opportunity to be surprised is really high.
Yeah.
Right. And so, from just talking to some of the locals down there to seeing some of the pictures of other deer people have on camera, the deer I personally have experienced, these deer move, for one thing, and we're talking miles. These deer get old because they don't have any pressure on them, and these deer are hard to kill.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's going to be a challenge, and so we set out last weekend to basically say, okay, let's try to make this as easy as possible to at least get some feeders in some areas, get some cameras in some areas.
We had to make a plan, and to make a plan, we had to get in there, and to get in there, we had to
cut
a bunch of these roads open.
Yeah. And so
grabbed the chainsaws, headed down. What was it, 5-6 hours?
5 or 6 hours
we
down
bust
there.
out of here on a Friday. Busted out here Friday morning. Get down there. Made a little grocery trip for the for food and stuff for the couple days there, and
it was cold, man. We got down there, and unlike here in Pennsylvania, like they're not used to getting snow that often down there.
Yeah,
and we had a significant snowfall,
decent amount. Made it kind of tough to get around this property on that Ranger. Today's if I could see around my hand here, it's like the 3rd of February. So I mean, it's winter.
It's winter time. Yeah, but even still, like there's times down there it get 50 degrees. I'd take the boat out on the lake. We got there and it was 30 degrees and 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to recap or, basically lay this property out, basically what it is and what a lot of Kentucky is the road systems are following the bottoms because the terrain is just too difficult to get up and over.
100%.
And so all the bottoms have kind of roads in them. And this one is no different. The property is divided almost in half. Maybe a third of it would sit on one side, the northern side of the road, and 2/3 of it would sit on the southern side. I think at one point they were two different tracts of land.
They were. One was family owned, one was recently acquired.
Eventually picked those up. And so from a topo map, it's hard to tell a difference between the northern and the southern side of the road, other than they're both surrounded by big ridges kind of all the way out. It's kind of a giant rectangle.
That's the property lines. I mean, if you think again back into the days when people were surveying and laying out claims, like you got on a ridge line and said, yeah, this is the line between my claim and your
we could
claim.
Do the same. And so when we were up looking in some of these saddles and stuff, we'd look over, so point to point, here is the property line roughly. And then right next to the road, down in almost the center of the properties, we've got a couple of fields. That I think the landowner has planted to something in the past.
Yeah, for cattle, baling hay off of it. There's some alfalfa and some orchard grass and stuff in the front, which is really cool because I think that's a big pull, a deer coming out of there.
And he's got a little brassica plot in there too.
Yes, which is where we initially kind of set up. And man, what crazy! Like you said, a lot of these roads just go right with the terrain up the guts and stuff. But obviously we get into the southern side to really start to navigate, and there's old logging roads. That place had probably been cut, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And you and I talked about it, and it's like, man, I would not have wanted to been the dozer guy to say, hey, go make some roads here.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking just straight up steep.
So we started with basically the landowner total. He's killed a nice buck off his property several years ago, and he kind of gave us like some places to look at. He's like, I would start here. He told us roughly where he'd killed that deer a few years ago.
Yep.
You had thrown a camera up, I think 2 or 3 weeks prior. We got a picture of a nice mature buck, so we know there's deer on the property. So we kind of just started up into the southern piece of the property at the bottom, out of that brassica plot. saws in hand. You picked up this new machine for this year. So we got a Polaris Ranger is what we're using to get around
Ranger 1000
the property.
And I think even before that, like, so I'm an Onyx guy, right? I'm no hiding that. I think it's one of the best tools that I've had in recent history, to be able to use and navigate and scout new spots. You know, I had, and I think you and Weston even said it, I had loaded that thing up with points prior to us getting
when
there.
you walked it the first time.
Yep, walking it the first time. And one of the first things that I do is, and this is just from hunting big terrain country, is I always look at the topo right away, right? And so in these pieces of country like this, there's so much of it that all looks the same. Right, so you got to figure out what's the true advantages there. So for me, it's looking for, in the ridge sides of things, saddle points. Anywhere that those points come down and it is clearly a funnel or a pinch for deer to push through. Any changes or flat ridged areas, so these benches. There's a few benches that we navigated. Yep, that absolutely could be really good bench spots for bedding, for a big buck to basically feel pretty secure on. And then still using that terrain to navigate for access, right? Because ultimately we can find the best spot in the world, but if we can't get to it, it doesn't matter.
Well, that's kind of a theme of what we've been talking about in some of these prior podcasts is like that whole woods can hold deer, but they're definitely held up in a few parts of it. And so we really just had to get out and walk and find the sign. And as of right now, you know, that's kind of where we're thinking they're going to spend most of their time.
Yeah. So Jared and I go in, we get the machine all loaded up, you know, we're all amped up. We drive up in there. I think we probably
maiden voyage, right? Almost. You had it around the house, but maiden voyage in
it was maiden voyage of this machine.
So we're breaking.
You know, and I've been waiting. Like I have an old school Honda Foreman that's from the 1990s. The thing runs like a champ, but like this is the next.
Yeah, we're not new to machines. You sold tractors for Cabela's for years and years. You know what you're doing on these things.
Know exactly what I'm doing, and it's an investment, right? But for what we were doing, and with the kids and stuff too, to get them around and pick up deer, makes a lot of sense. So we drive this thing up in there and. You know, right away, and we let's not lie. You and I were ready to cut.
Oh yeah,
we've been bottled up for too long.
Oh yeah, that's the first excuse to get out. Yeah, there's no sheds on the ground yet. It's just chainsaw time.
Yeah, and so you know, come up, start cutting trees. We're navigating through there. We were making a pretty good clip. I noticed at one point in time, you were actually walking ahead of me. And there was a small washout, right? And I remember just like, you know, blowing over it. And I'm like, yeah, that's how a machine's supposed to do it. In retrospect, like that was a dangerous spot that we eventually paid attention to.
Yeah.
You know, but
I think we were just like, oh, go, let's go.
Yeah, let's just keep going, man. It's an old log and
road. It's one of those ones in hindsight. It's like, are we gonna get back across that thing?
Yeah, and so, you know, and given like anybody that's driven any of these kind of machines, you know, this is a 1,000cc machine. You know, we get to the logging road, which I said, hey, this is how we're going to get back to this first saddle and eventually hit this property line. And we look at that road and we're like, oh shit, like that's steep. First of all, we're not getting
serious roads.
We're not getting an e-bike up that. We thought maybe this was a way to get an e-bike up and kind of slip in there.
Mm-hmm. There were some spots even while you were driving. I was like, dude, I'm gonna get out and walk. Like, I trust you, but like, I'll meet you.
You did trust me for a while. So yeah, we get up this road, and I remember even having to back down and try to reapproach it a couple of times before, just because these roads, nobody's maintaining this stuff.
And the snow was making it really difficult too, because not only is it really steep, washed out, you've got probably at least 3 or 4 inches of snow on it that's making it really slick too. Exactly. I think it had rained maybe a few weeks prior.
It rained almost 2.5 inches.
It was tough conditions. In hindsight, we might have wanted to reconsider how we did that, but
we needed to get there.
I don't think we realized that it was going to be that steep and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, we got up that one and we cleared up. We got to the first saddle fairly easy. Mm-hmm. And so this back saddle that we've kind of...
Which is one of the spots that the landowner was like, hey, I would definitely check this
one out.
Well,
and I've had a camera on there, just the camera, no corn, nothing else, no scrape.
Got a couple bucks cruising through there.
Yeah, I mean, probably 4 to 6 different bucks, you know, 2s and 3s.
And it was awesome. Once we got up there, I was like, oh, yeah.
This is where they're coming
The whole way up there, I was like, okay, yeah, benches, timber, it all kind of looks the same. And then when you got to this saddle point, it's kind of an obvious crossing. You had a bunch of these roads kind of coming in. You had a nice deep saddle, and on the I don't know what side of the hill that would have been. Just off the property, there's a nice big thicket.
Been to the north and west of us.
That felt bucky.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, you and I sat there,
and we found those old tree sticks too, where I was like, right here,
yeah, he's been here before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I guess if I could back up on that a little bit, this goes back to our expectation type of thing, right? You and I have our own expectations of what we're out there to hunt, what gets us excited, what we want to pursue. Just like that, the landowner and the neighbors have the same kind of thought process, and that that landowner's killed one buck in I think 7 years on that property, a mature 140.
And he's primarily a rifle hunter, and he's got other places to hunt too, so we don't know how hard he's been hitting it.
The neighbor who's been there for 10 years is like out to kill 170s, right?
Well, and we saw along the roadside, 3-4 feeders within 200 yards of each other.
And I've seen pictures of 170-inch deer out there on that place.
They're definitely in the area.
So yeah, I mean the fact is we're not going into this thing to say, hey, the first 120-inch deer we see we're going to kill. Mm-hmm. There are big bucks that can be in these places. And I think this is an obvious spot that we had picked out from the map. We had heard from the landowner. We're starting to piece things together. The hardest part, I think, once we got there and we realized, we need to hunt this, where are we going to put a stand? Mm-hmm. And we sat there for 15 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Easily?
Yeah, easily. Well, the hard part is, I think we're still trying to figure, because this is my first time hunting. I guess I've hunted Kentucky one other time, but it was kind of a wash. But I think we're still conflicted on trying to figure out, do we want to hunt feeders? Mm-hmm. There is obviously a terrain feature here that's worth hunting, but the two, we want them to work together.
They have to. I mean,
but it's hard to choose a tree because, as we said, a lot of times it's point to point. Mm-hmm. So the most obvious, X marks the spot in terms of a saddle is typically your property line. And while I think we're okay to hunt that property line, you can't put a feeder on it or even just across it. That's not going to work. So we stood there for a long time trying to figure out, if we're going to put a feeder here, how should we place it in conjunction with where this primary crossing is at? And if we do that, where can we place our stand so that we're covering all of it at the same time?
And I think in that same point, that's when you start to really do a finer analysis on where you're at, right? So we saw kind of where this thick bedding area went to the northwest. Buck's likely going to be bedded up in there. We found a few white oaks, a few red oaks, so now we know there's acorns in that area. That could
lot of oak trees everywhere.
Yep, old rubs were in that thing. So all the signs point to that being a good spot, feeder or not. And obviously, right. I think right now deer movement is pretty damn suppressed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they're localizing on food sources.
Yeah, they don't.
So if there's a red oak or something that's still dropping, or as we saw down in that one bottom, there's still some bean fields out there.
Why would they want to move
right now?
Any movement that they're doing at this point in time is just burning energy, right? But yet I'm catching bucks just cruising through that spot in January.
Yep.
So I think that I'm confident, right? Let's February 3rd. Let's mark this moment in history where we feel pretty confident that we're going to kill a buck or at least be on a buck in that spot come this fall.
Nothing else, we're putting a stand here.
Yeah, there will be a stand there. Mm-hmm. But I think that really started to paint the picture of the property because although we're on the 2/3 part of the property, the southern part of the property, so almost 210, 215 acres, we had just covered a large section of it pretty quickly and we're we've got one spot. Mm-hmm. And that's not a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess what I want people to understand is just because you have 300 or 500 acres, I think, so we got this lease through Base Camp Leasing. Mm-hmm. Base Camp Leasing, just for safety and insurance purposes, always puts a cap on the number of people who can be hunting that property. And I think the cap on this property was 7, maybe. There's no way you could hunt 7 people at a time on there.
Yeah, well, not the way that we want to hunt it.
Sure. So I think that's kind of, as you start to think about this more and more, when you're doing your viewpoint on a property like this, you need to look for the best spot, the most accessible spot, and then what also in that spot is really going to lead to your success throughout the season. In September, if we don't have a feeder there, we're not going to kill buck. I firmly believe it. I just don't see any reason those deer would be moving through there. Acorns aren't really dropping yet. Where would they be heading?
Which in the season, that's a good point. The season down here opens September 1st.
First weekend in September usually.
weekend in
So
September, so
somewhere
pretty
between
early.
the 1st and 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which typically you would be thinking at that point we got to get on ag, which that's what I would think, but there isn't any. And so I agree with you. A feeder might be our best bet to get something.
We talked about
in
planting
September.
beans. I mean,
In the bottom, yep.
we could easily try to get down there in April, May.
Hey, Ian, if you want, you can pull this
yeah,
up on
let's pull
Onyx
that up.
and we can
Pull
kind
it
of
up so we can
point
take a
these
look
out
at
as
it.
we're going.
I think that if we went in there in April or May in that bottom, and it's only a few acres, you planted beans, we hit it with deer grow hard, and I mean, I guess I always am kind of like, what's the worst that's going to happen? The deer are just going to eat all the beans? Great, then we'll just plant a green field.
Sure.
Come fall.
I can't help but be wary too, especially with what that lander had told us as far as drawing deer to the front of the property. I'm a little worried about poaching down there.
I think anyone. I mean, that's one thing that I haven't necessarily had a ton of experience with. I think the questions come across several times for your property of like, what happens to these deer? Mm-hmm. And you're in an area that is much more open, that if a deer is cruising, it's more vulnerable to poaching.
I don't know, man. At the same time, my property in Ohio's got a lot of hidden fields and stuff.
Sure.
And so if these deer are coming out before dark, it's not necessarily right by the roadside. But in Kentucky, at least this part of Kentucky, the only fields and like ag sources that these deer are coming out to, again, potentially before
right next
dark,
to the road.
is right next to the road. And so I would think it would be pretty easy to cruise and see a lot of deer roadside in this part of Kentucky.
Well, the hope is that everybody knows that the warden owns that land, and that's probably not the best
I hope
move.
so. Yeah, I hope that will help.
Coincidentally, and Ian, I might have to send you this picture. We actually had some modified tractors, lawnmower tractors,
Oh, that's right.
visit our property as well.
How bizarre, man. And we have no idea. This is treacherous country. As you'll find out, we had some struggles even with the Ranger.
I'll find that picture. I'll send it over to you.
These are modified riding mowers. And we got a picture on our trail cam of these two guys going up and over the mountain with these. And the one guy had a gas tank on the back and stuff. And so there must be some route through the property that we've not yet found.
Well, I think that the interesting part about that is, number one, like when I saw them do it, I caught them at the saddle for the first one, and then I caught them again at the food plot at the front of the property. And it was like, oh, okay, these guys just moved through, just went through the old logging roads, right? Now here we are on the property with a Polaris 1000 built for off-road, right? And there's no way in hell I see these guys getting through this property.
Dude, I bet you they climbed that. I bet you they went right up that same hill we did.
I mean, maybe,
unless there's a road that connects to that bottom road, but I don't think so. I think we would have seen it. There was no snow on the ground that day, I don't think. Yeah. And they are modified tractors, so they must be pretty seriously modified.
I'm gonna get this picture over to Ian really quick. The other thing, as you'll notice whenever I get this, I don't know if that one came through it, Ian. Let me give me 1 second.
You're on Onyx there, Ian?
Let's see here. I think, man, it's such a clutch picture though. They also apparently still believe that the South is going to rise again.
That's right.
From the picture. Yeah. So I think between the two.
There you go.
Yeah. So this is the property that we're talking about here. Ian, I'm sending you this picture through the same Teams thing. But yeah. So you can see easily like. The top of the lines are close together. It's steep. There's obviously a lot of terrain. I obviously got a little happy with the icons, but that's part of it.
Yeah.
But how this thing, you could clearly see like right through the middle here is the main road.
And so This is oriented north and south. So
yep. This main road that's going to go in east to west here, and you can see the fields in the bottom, and they're pretty big fields. I mean, there's several acres of plantings in the front.
To give you an idea of the acreage here, I mean, this lease that's surrounded here is 350 acres.
Yep.
So you're sitting in thousands of acres of timber.
Correct. And so, I think that as you can see, and what we're talking about here is down on the southwest piece of the property itself. We're down in this corner here, again, right on the property line aspect. And the one thing that I'll note here, if you're looking at any of these lines, like knock yourself out for Menifee County, like Onyx and Menifee County don't exist. These lines, I have no idea when they've been updated last. In fact, my property still says it's owned by the old landowner, and I bought it, almost 2 years ago at this point.
It helps. Gives us a reference point.
But I think again, Onyx is an amazing tool, but keep in mind, like, if you're hunting an area that you've never been in before, absolutely check with the local magistrate or clerk's office and get actual plat maps, because if you're going to go off of this, and I've seen a lot of people, I know the whitetail adrenaline guys have fallen victim to using maps.
Yeah, that's right.
Going out and hunting a piece of public that turns out that it wasn't public.
Fortunately, it's a piece of private ground, and the landowner's been there for quite some time. He can tell us.
He's the one who helped give me the boundaries on it.
But public is, yeah, you're right.
A whole different ballgame. I mean, one of the reasons we talked about in the Dakota hunt that we succeeded so well is because we had an Onyx that could outline all these public pieces that were bumping up right next to the private land. So, differences of opinions in how you can use this thing. But, I mean, keep in mind, you're looking at probably several thousand acres of timber here, all conjoined. And these deer, we've got reports of a buck from last year that the landowner was watching that was literally making a 4-mile loop during November. How do you hunt a deer like that? I mean, you probably get in these saddles is the best chance, because if he's going to come on the property, he's going to cross in.
Well, that's what we found.
Somewhere
I mean, there's some parts of this. A lot of it is unpassable, especially the eastern and the western sides, because you can see these ridges kind of run north and south. And a lot of that is unpassable, even to a deer. I mean, I'm sure he could get over it if he wanted to, but a lot of that movement, I think, is going to be confined to some of these saddles, which could be a major advantage. I mean, that's what we're thinking at this point.
Well, I mean, his strategy when he and a couple of his buddies hunted gun pretty hard here for, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. There's a 170-inch buck that they knew on the north side of the property, and their strategy was everybody take a saddle.
Sure.
And you can't argue that strategy, because it's basically, if he's coming onto the property, they're coming through one of these saddles here. And so the opportunity exists then, if you've got 3 of the 4 saddles covered, the odds of you getting eyes on this deer as it comes back and forth through the property are pretty good. In fact, when we ended up going to the north, we saw that pretty clearly, where it's like, listen, if a deer's crossing into this property back and forth, this is where they're coming through at.
Yeah, it's really cool to see this map again. I think this is the first time I've looked at it since we were down there. I'd looked at it previously, got some ideas, but now that we've walked it, especially in this far corner where I know we're going to get to, that looks like the only ridge, and I know we saw a lot of sign up here. This is the only ridge that's running east to west.
East to west. Everything else is
kind
north
of
to
a
south.
protected ridge back there. Really cool. Same with the southwest. I mean, this is a very obvious saddle right here, and it was exactly that when we got on it. So,
Ian, do you have that picture come through of our? Let's bring that up. Would love the viewers to kind of be able to see the things that you can deal with on a new piece of property that sometimes could lead to frustration, but also almost a bit of being awestruck in the way that they were able to navigate this property. So here, let's see what we've got.
What are you pulling? Pictures of tractors?
Wow. Look at that. That's impressive. I'm not kidding, man.
Those are definitely tractors, right?
Well, I got a
What do you
picture.
think,
That back one's definitely a tractor.
They're modified lawnmowers. That's exactly what they are.
Yeah,
they're riding
front.
tractors.
It's got that cover on
Yeah.
it. Like,
Kind of looks like a four-wheeler.
No. They're both modified tractors.
what is that, a Cub Cadet?
Yeah, that's definitely what we're talking about here. The fact
He's
is,
not
like,
pulling them either, right? They're driving independently.
driving independently. Like, I get this clear back on the saddle, and there's a trail there, right? I completely get it. The next picture is them here going through the front of the property. And it's like, okay, like, that's
This
impressive.
isn't Hills Have Eyes, right? These are different people.
I don't know.
Okay.
The flag's the best part.
I know.
Well, yeah, I mean,
You see the gas tank on the back of it, too?
if you're gonna go out for a leisurely tractor ride, you best wave the flag that you're bearing.
Too funny, man. This is actually on the Nebraska plot down there towards the front of the property.
But and it's hard to describe to people that haven't been on it. But I mean, when we say this property is steep and these logging roads are treacherous, I'm talking like,
That's serious.
we'll get to it here. You could die on this stuff.
Oh, dude, look at these tires. I'll bet they came right up that. I bet they went right up that road when there was no snow there. I mean, it's doable. It's just very steep. I'll bet those mowers will do 50 on the road.
I used to see that. And
See if you could pull up like some souped up tractor stuff. Let's see what they're capable of.
I'm pretty sure
Google souped up tractor like hill climb. Let's see what they can do.
Didn't Adam Sandler in Waterboy have like a tractor that he would like ride to school every day? That's probably what that was.
I want to see what these tractors are capable of.
Our Hunter podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow. Food plots are a big piece of the puzzle for you and I, whether it's on a lease or ground that we personally own. When we started growing food plots and really failing at it out of the gate, we looked out there like we do for most things of what's that advantage, what's that edge that's going to help our plots grow better. And we found Deer Grow and Plot Start and Plot Boost, and it's been a critical piece of our food plot strategy ever since.
Yeah, it's worked awesome for us over the years, especially on my property. There's a lot of food plots that we've wanted to plant that I can't get big tractor equipment into. And actually, I didn't have a pull-behind sprayer, even for a UTV or an ATV until, just recently, actually. So what we found ourselves having to do was to walk back into these properties, in a lot of cases burn them off, put seed down by hand, and then I would take a backpack sprayer full of Plot Start on the same day that I was planting that food plot, put it down, and then a few weeks after it was growing, I would go back with the Plot Boost again in the backpack sprayer, hit it again, and I wasn't really needing to do any additional liming or fertilizing to have a successful food plot out there.
I mean, I think that's the main thing is the fact that you don't have to plan to lime, months in advance and have that broken down. You can literally treat it with Plot Start at planting. And then on a fertilizer standpoint, so much of that goes to waste. This really kind of brings any of those nutrients that are bound in the soil up into that plant. So, better food plots, bigger deer. Check them out at deergrow.com. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as we're getting into this thing, right, first of all, that's impressive. So kudos to those guys. Don't ever show back up on that property, but, mad props for navigating it with a lawnmower.
Props. That's funny.
So, we get to this part. And I think this was cool for you. When we left that spot, and we kind of go up on the property border, and you see these big, rock wall.
Yeah, so we're running the southern rim of the property now. We stopped at the saddle, we put a camera out, dropped some corn, some mineral, chose a stand tree, and now we're heading east.
And I wonder, we looked at so we see, we're talking these big rock ledges, caves underneath them, and all of a sudden 20 yards of a cut. Right, and then back to the rock ledges, 20 yards of a cut open.
A couple little openings.
And you and I we found one, what I think looked like a pretty decent set of buck tracks crossing that one spot that we went to. And that's the one place that you and I were like, man, if we had another camera, this is it.
And I found myself thinking about Indians a lot while we were on that property, just because,
that's
not
the
just
navigation.
The deer, there's people too. If these guys are trying to, I don't know,
sure.
soldiers or like people, other Indians invade. There's only a few places that you can use to get through this property, and I can just envision these guys hiding up in these rock shelves and stuff.
These are legitimate animal funnels, right? The fact is that it doesn't matter if it's bear, deer, turkey, bobcat, coyotes, whatever. This is the only way they're cutting through the property line because it's just sheer cliffs on other sides of them.
Yeah.
What
you got, Ian? You find anything?
Not yet.
It's just
just go to YouTube and look up tractor hill climb.
Okay.
I want to see what we can find here.
We might see those guys.
I'll bet it's a thing that we don't know. I bet it's a real event. I bet they've got something like that.
For sure.
So, anyway, sorry.
No, we're good. So, navigate through that. We're cutting trees. At this point...
That's right. We're cutting as we're going. That's really why we're there, was to clear these old logging roads
clearing
out.
things out. We saw quite a bit of buck sign. Again, pretty desolate in terms of tracks of just deer being on the property. Mm-hmm. But you start to get, I think as we went towards the east more, we started to get a better diversity of the property. We started getting into some more thick areas, some points that basically came down.
There's a lot of unnavigable terrain. There's some big bottoms, a bunch of shelves that nobody's been on in years.
Well, and again, how would you hunt them?
Right.
This becomes the story. Yeah, this becomes the story of the entire trip is man, this looks great. How would we get here?
Right.
That's
kind of where we're at now. Is now that we've retreated, and this is probably where we'll end the podcast. Is we found some spots, we found some good stuff. The question is, how do you get to them, and what's the right way to hunt?
When everybody's got those spots, I don't care if you're hunting farmland in Ohio, you're hunting the mountains of Kentucky, you're hunting the swamps of Louisiana. Yeah. Everybody's got spots that it's this is the place I need to be. But that you're either pushing the bar too far to get to that, or it's just not going to work anyways when you get to it. And so, but I think that sometimes if you can figure that out, that is the chess piece. And if you can figure out how to beat that, how to access that in the right way without bumping deer out of there, you'll probably stand to be more successful.
Sure.
For sure. I think that the other thing too is we kind of go through, it really amplified the importance of having that road system in the South.
Huge.
Even though we spent
there's no way you're getting on that property without that road.
We spent a whole day going through cutting. The fact is that was the only way that we really would have been able to access this property efficiently, I guess. Whether that's for cameras or for hunting or for corn,
sure.
Without that road system, you're kind of left hanging. And I wonder how many of those properties to the south and to the east that we bump up to had navigable systems as well. Because my thinking is in some of those areas that we were looking at, we're going to be pulling in or seeing deer that are bedded from other properties, basically being pushed into ours or we're drawing them into ours.
Yeah, don't know.
So what do you got? Oh my God, that very well could be it, dude.
Mr. Studebaker.
No doubt. No doubt. That's exactly what it is.
At the beginning of this video, they're all camped out in a parking lot with tents and everything. They're all their tractors are on the tents.
Let's see what he can do here. Oh yeah.
Yeah, this literally.
Oh my goodness.
This literally could be our Kentucky lease.
Dude, that's what these tires on this other thing look like.
That's exactly what it is.
Wow.
It's an extreme event.
What's he got his whole
He's got a winch on the
family
front.
down there filming this thing?
He's got a winch on the front of that thing.
Well, you're gonna need one.
What time?
How was the time 28?
I don't know.
28 seconds.
Doesn't it only go to 24? Was that military? That's
I think it's in seconds. 28 seconds.
Gonna take that turn sharp.
This guy's gonna follow suit. He's got his own tractor.
I like the lean. You see that? He's like, I know I'm gonna roll, but I'm not gonna let it.
This guy's a wannabe.
Anytime you got to back up, you're done.
He didn't have the power.
That's gonna hurt his
shirt
time.
says something racing. I wonder if they race these things.
Yeah, that's gonna hurt his time. I love the posted sign
The
right there as well.
property line,
They're like, yeah, that's not ours. Don't worry.
And they got the whole county out here watching us.
Oh, 31.
Here's Mr. Studebaker
Yeah.
coaching him.
I think Studebaker probably runs.
High boy 77. Let's see what he's got.
Studebaker definitely runs high octane 93 in
He's running a
his.
Craftsman. This one here is pretty standard. He cuts his lawn with this on the weekdays.
Wow.
Whoa.
There were shades of Fast and the Furious there
Check out
for a
the ball
second.
shorts. He's probably got an air conditioned seat on this one.
Straight Tokyo drifting. Oh, this doesn't look good. This doesn't look
too
good.
wide.
Oh, yep. There you go. There you go.
Pump it into submission. Here we go.
I like
Look at these
that.
cowboy boots.
Boy, he's in trouble. Oh man, he's got a shift and yeah.
He blew a gas.
Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. Well, I think he's.
Look at his flags he's got here marking the perimeter.
Yeah, that's not gonna fly. Oh boy, he might still be on the course right now. I'm not sure.
Love that.
Oh man.
So it does exist.
It does
Yeah, man.
exist. That's exactly what those things were.
Let's see what his time was.
Oh. Yeah, that didn't work out for him. That's got to be low 50s, I think.
I'd say minute.
Right up that
Oh.
one.
Well, there you go.
Wow.
That's what we're dealing with. So hopefully there's no tractor
That's what we're
races.
dealing with.
Hopefully there's no tractor races on the lease.
We're
And
gonna have
the
to trade in our Ranger for one of those things.
no doubt, man. It definitely seems a little bit more nimble. Which brings us to our point. We can't have nice things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is tough on their equipment in some parts, and you and I have both had our close calls / past close calls experiences with power equipment. Me on a tractor, you on a dirt bike. But we were basically kind of putting along there on the east side of this road, and there were some washouts and stuff. And again, nobody had been on it for a long time, and we come up to a point where
You were driving, right?
yes. Well,
There it is. Long
Yeah.
story short, yeah, we flipped the thing.
yes. And flip is a hard word.
Rolled.
I'd like to say lay on the side.
Lay it on the side. Yeah, it did not make it all the way around. Just flipped it.
Yeah,
over
it was slow enough that for some reason I thought I could put my foot down and stop us. That didn't happen. Didn't work. Yeah. Can't have nice things. Maiden voyage on this
machine
thing.
laying on its side.
Yeah, we had better days at this point. And it was cold too, man. The temperature had started to plummet.
See the empty bed that was completely full of like all of our chainsaw equipment,
chainsaws, corn, cameras.
Corn, exactly.
At one point in time, so the fortunate and unfortunate thing about this incident here is I'd placed the winch remote in the glove box, and in the process of flipping or rolling or laying on the side, that remote got tossed into the snow.
Along with my phone, and
I wasn't worried about your phone.
We had a few other things.
I was more worried about the winch at that point.
That's what I looked for first. I was like, I got to make sure if I got to call somebody, because you were stuck. Like, first things first.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tried to put my foot down to stop us because it literally was a slow motion. And so let me back up for a second. As we're kind of going along there, we're just looking at terrain. There's this. It looks perfectly clear.
I was looking at terrain. I hope you were looking at the road.
Apparently not.
I was riding next to you. I was looking at the ridge, and that's how I described it. It was like next thing I knew, we were going this way, and I was falling on top of it.
I was looking at the trail, and it looked just clear snow the whole way. Well, what happened is with that 3 or 4 inches of snow is one side just right in the middle of the road.
Go back to the one where you can see the road.
It literally dropped 3 feet. Split right in the middle of the road.
So this is the side of the road here, and that side is completely washed
So when
out.
you're looking at this thing completely clear and snow covered, it looked uniform straight across. Yeah. Well, as soon as we got there, that front wheel went down, and that was it. We went over, and so yeah, it starts to lean, and I went to put my foot down to stop us, and the machine laid on my foot. Of which you had to use your mommy adrenaline to lift it off.
Mama bear strength. I was like, what?
Yeah.
I've been in I was an EMT too, so like I'm good in like
I didn't need
high
CPR.
anxiety situations. I was just like, I was like, are you okay? You're like, my foot's caught. The machine was still running. I think at that point gas was like pouring out, and so I heaved it up real quick. We got your foot out. I made sure it was okay. Fortunately, it was just
it wasn't broken.
Tucked under there a little bit, and we started collecting ourselves. We shut the machine off.
Yeah, it was really what happened at that point.
We had a little 2.5 gallon gas tank for the saws in the back, and we were standing there just like collecting ourselves, and I heard gunk, 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 gunk. And fortunately it was that and not the machine.
Not the machine.
So we got that pulled out. We grabbed all the saw stuff. It's actually, you can see it just in the bottom of the picture here.
Yeah, that's after we moved it out.
Pulled everything out, got it all collected. That glove box popped open, which you said had the winch remote, my phone, some other stuff in it, which we found all, scattered
somewhere in the
right
snow,
and
around.
But,
so then became the challenge of, okay, well now we're like 2 miles back in here. We could easily walk out.
Yeah, far back in.
But like, what are we gonna do with this machine? How are we gonna get this thing over? So that's where the winch came in. Yeah. Right. And so, power of minds. How do we strategically move this machine and then lift this machine up? And given, if you've ever been around a machine, you're not lifting it up. You're not flipping.
We tried. I was like, how heavy is this thing?
Yeah. It's heavy.
What do you think? It's probably 1,500 pounds.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 2,000. I don't know.
Yeah.
So we ended up actually tying it off on that tree.
To the left.
Yep.
So you can see here it's pretty close to this washout, and we wanted to try to get away from it a little bit.
And that washout is deep. I mean, you're looking at that and you're like, oh, okay, it's like a little lip. No, it's like 3 feet. That's a 3-foot drop straight through the middle there. Yeah. And so when that front wheel went off, it was over. At that point, we were already leaning that way hard.
So that's what we did. Is the winch is on the front, and we did find the remote. Fortunately, we were kind of scrambling looking for that for a little while. But we hooked it to the tree on the left and kind of just drug it on its side, maybe foot and a half, so that we had a little better angle on it. And then we actually ran it up and over the front of the machine and out and around the top of the frame, and then way over to a.
Yep. Use a corn bag as a buffer so we didn't damage the machine.
Yeah, we're trying to protect the machine as we were doing it. And then, pretty simply, just
popped it right up over.
Popped right back over.
What's the next picture, Ian?
That's all of them.
There should be one more once we got our foot back over.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Hey!
How did you get out?
What's that?
How did Jared get out?
Well, he was laying on top of me.
I don't actually remember. I kind of just fell out of the machine, like on top of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. We weren't wearing seatbelts because we were hopping out every 10 yards.
We were going 2 miles an hour.
We're going super slow, and we're hopping out all the time to saw stuff. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and we're just crawling too.
Yeah. And at that point, you can kind of see, like, now the machine's down in this ditch. You could see, like, that is the middle of the trail is where that drop off is, that washout is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. I mean, I've flipped a tractor before. Spent a week in the ICU. Jared's taken a dirt bike into a bulldozer, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're not. we've had our incidents.
Yeah, I've been way closer to death than this, but
yeah. It was a quick gut check reminder.
Could have been way worse.
Yeah.
Well, and we found out when we circled back and around and we're getting out, there were some pretty treacherous places, and it could have been a lot worse than this. Where if you go over the edge, I mean, you're not stopping until you're at the bottom.
Yeah, which is way down there. So, I mean, most people may have said, "Hey, let's wrap it up after this." We said
we considered it. We're like, dude,
yeah,
let's.
What time is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, let's keep going.
We were so close at that point, though, to we were just trying to get out and around this ridge to get another corn.
We
pile
wanted
out
to
with
get
some
everything
camera.
on the south side completed in day one so that we could spend more time on the north side of the property the next morning. That was the plan. We didn't really want to have to leave and come back onto this side.
That's right. This was day one.
Yeah. The other thing is I didn't really necessarily feel like I wanted to drive that machine the whole way back up in there to get back to this point.
Yeah. So we finished it out. We got down there another 400 or 500 yards, whatever. Got the camera out.
Found a really good spot out on the edge of that
nice
ridge.
spot. Yep.
I mean, thick, gnarly. We've seen a lot of bucks on camera there that have shown up. A lot of does. I mean, feels like a bucky ridge.
Hate to do this to you. I got to pee real quick.
Okay.
Gonna man the fort for a second?
Yeah, I can do that.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. Oh. We can take a quick cut if you want.
Do you want to...
Why don't you guys just talk about the spot? Pull it up on Onyx and show them where it's at. I'll be like 30 seconds.
Yep, let's do that. Yeah, so we're kind of down on this southern end down here. And you could actually see, so this trail, that this little blue dashed line is a trail that I had walked I think it was a couple weeks before that. So if you keep going down, yeah, so this corner, right around where that trail camera marker is kind of where we hit this kind of washout spot. And it was crazy because, I mean, we had covered way worse stuff than what we had seen here. And it just, at that spot, for whatever reason, that entire ditch was just gone, washed out completely. And so when you've got things like that, you really got to pay attention to, what's in front of you. And again, no excuses in the final flaw of it, but, that snow was pretty deceiving at that point in time. So yeah, we ended up carrying ourselves right back out to this eastern part of the property. Again, it's kind of, I think where you see those deer tracks at on this eastern side. Mm-hmm. That's this thin ridge, and it's real thick along there. Drops off on both sides, off the property and on the property. And we set up a camera in the corner there. We've had a ton of deer activity. The one thing to note, though, that I think is kind of leaves my head scratching is this camera mark that's up at the top of the screen is the brassica plot where we've put corn, and we've had this shooter buck show up.
Right.
We have had those same bucks that have been with that deer at the southwest saddle and at this eastern bait pile that we basically put out with cameras. Mm-hmm. He's not shown up on any of those.
Yeah, well, we haven't seen him since.
So where's he at?
I would guess that deer's probably not far. Either somebody else has had a feeder out for a while, or he's just found some other food source. Like you said, that's what they do this time of year.
Yeah, there's a lot of brassica still
find
on
a
that
spot
bottom.
where they can eat. I mean, they'll hang out until that food's not there anymore.
Yeah, still a lot of brassica. So that's kind of how we wrapped up that evening. We did have to go, again, on the way out, we found there was one spot we took some logs and tried to fill in a washout, of which I think we're going to have to maybe bring in some cement bags and puncture them or something to fill that in.
A couple sketchy spots on the way out of there, too. Again, just because there was snow. I mean, hopefully we don't have to deal with that in the future. But
yeah, I'm not necessarily worried about traction and stuff when it dries itself back out, but just some of those cleaned, washed out areas, obviously can be pretty treacherous.
Yeah.
So, just for future safe, we'll probably go in and try to really work on those areas and just make sure that it's, what we don't want to do is all the work that we put in clearing these trails and stuff, to have one single washout in a certain area prevent us from, maximizing our effort on this property. So, unlike the southern portion, the northern side of this property has 0 trails. They exist. but they're extremely grown in to the point where we're almost having to rediscover these things a little bit.
We're thinking that southern side had probably been timbered a little more recently than the northern.
It has. I think it was probably 10 to 15, where the other one might be 15, 20.
Yeah, the northern side's got some stuff. There are roads there, but there's saplings
grown straight up through the middle of them.
Size saplings up in there.
So what we did on the northern side,
and we didn't have time to saw any of that. We kind of had limited time.
Put boots on the ground
on Saturday, so we decided just to go walk the whole thing. Yep. We took a similar path. We kind of headed up on the eastern side and just walked all these ridges all the way out and around it, and just kind of observed, saw what we saw. We found some really good sign. I was encouraged because it seemed like there was better deer sign on the northern side of the property.
You said that a lot. You thought you felt better, at least about the deer sign, and maybe even the way that it laid itself out.
Yeah. Not as good about access. Like we said, it was
well,
thicker.
I mean, our best spots are clear to the back.
Clear in the back, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, again, it kind of lays itself out just like any property does. It's got its challenges. If it's easy to get to these spots, you're probably not going to see what I would think is bigger bucks and older age classes. Mm-hmm. The harder it is to get back into these spots. And, I mean, in this part especially, we walked back to a couple of these back saddles on the property line, and there clearly was a big buck.
Yeah. Well, the best sign that we found was on this clear northwestern side of it. I mean, that's probably quarter mile back in there.
More than that, because I remember at one point in time, I think when we were in the bottom here, we said, hey, what would it take to walk to the back? It was 0.6. So we're probably 3/4 of a mile to the back. Yeah. And again, that's what I'm saying. You've got to be willing to get out there and put miles on your boots to hunt these deer. Because without that, you're not going to access, you're not going to sit down in this bottom and expect to shoot a mature buck. It's just not going to happen, right? Unless he somehow gets drug out there chasing a doe. Odds of him just funneling down at this bottom next to the road where there's the most disturbance probably isn't good.
Yeah. A lot of oaks on this side of the property as well. I mean, the whole thing felt really good. I mean, it could be a nice buck anywhere in here. And to my knowledge, we haven't had a camera. Well, we did. You got one camera up in here, but nothing really on it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a couple bucks, but I mean, I never had corn up there. It didn't seem like the travel funnel was in the right spot. Yeah. We moved that camera down in this bottom here, right behind the barn, and we haven't seen anything down in there. So, it's not that this time of year you don't get really your hopes up or disappointed it can change so much between now and August, September. Mm-hmm. And so what will be really kind of exciting about this property is, once we get to that June, July time frame and we really start to set things up, what do we start to see on this property?
Yeah.
And even I think it'll be one of those properties that every week you get closer to the second week of November, new deer could show up. So, it's just an understanding of what are your expectations. I think we've highlighted a handful of spots that will probably have stands and cameras.
Yeah.
I think there's a handful of spots that easily could produce a big buck. But man, it's tough hunting.
Sure.
And so this to me, if we think about all of the properties that we have leased for 2021, and even public in some cases, this is probably the hardest property we're going to have to hunt.
For sure.
Even when we're in the Dakotas hunting, the fact is you're going to put some miles on, but the terrain is pretty navigable. Mm-hmm. This terrain sucks.
Yeah, and I think something else that's going to make it tough is, like we said, we're hunting primarily saddles and movement more than we are a destination.
Yeah, I don't know where these deer are
and
going.
It's 5 or 6 hours away from, where we live. And so it's really going to take the right situation of, a buck showing up somewhat consistently, with I don't know, figuring out the right time of year, and we got to make the trips down to this place count. So I think at that point in walking the property, our conversation started to change from wanting to see what was on the property as we were getting around it to what can we do to improve it, and how are we going to hunt this thing? How are we going to access it as well?
I think that was the big one is, we've kind of figured out some of the places that we can walk the terrain to get to these back spots. That said, you're not going to just, even though I'm down there often, it's not like I'm just going to go and show up at these spots and just hunt them.
Well, and by walking it, we figured out where the deer were spending their time at least where the most amount of sign was. So we honed in on a few different areas. The question then became, what do we need to do, what can we do to improve these areas to hold deer here more consistently? and then how are we going to access it and hunt it? And so again, there's no way you're putting food plots on this.
We're gonna have one probably down in the bottom on the south side.
It's Kentucky, it's private land, so you can bait. We could go out and dump corn piles, but the problem with that, like I said, is we're 5-6 hours from here.
You dump one corn pile.
A corn pile
and
is gone in a week.
How are you getting corn piles into some of these? And then, like, the amount of effort it took for us to get down on there.
You can't get bait to a lot of these places.
So yeah, I mean, I think we came back around and said, if we want to have a dependable potential destination for these deer beyond acorns and stuff like that, what about putting some larger feeders?
Yeah, well, this is where we're at now, is trying to figure this part of it out. And I do think that with food plots essentially out of the equation on some of these back spots, feeders are the next logical option.
Yep.
One that I've got a love-hate relationship with for sure. We've tried feeders. I've got some on my Ohio place, and I don't know if we put one in Kentucky or not, or in Kansas rather. But it's not a guarantee. Like the bucks on my family farm seem to be very hesitant to come into those.
That's an interesting
definitely
point. During
daylight.
Yeah, and I kind of get the same gist. So this year was a little bit off because I wasn't at the cabin as much. We had a water issue and just with COVID. But last year when I had feeders out, I had two shooter bucks showing up at feeders fairly consistent, a little daylight, mostly at night, which goes back to the whole, like, hey, just because you can feed doesn't mean it's going to be easy to kill them. Yeah. But it makes logical sense that once we get into October, these big bucks don't want to be head-to-head against another buck, with their mouth up into a feeder.
No doubt.
So I think that's where, like, I really like Boss Buck's protein feeders. Mm-hmm. That's what I've used. I think that they're great feeders. And I have a lot of bucks that use those in the summertime. I don't know if it's a right or wrong, but we've talked about the potential for spin feeders, right? For a couple of reasons. Number one is it's going to sling that feed or corn out into a distance so multiple bucks could be in the same area feeding without being so close together, which when the testosterone levels rise, they don't want to do that. Yeah. And the other thing is, for us, when we talk about bigger feeders, is because if we go back and we put the effort in to set up a feeder and feed it, I don't want to have to go back there until it's
the bigger
time.
The better. I mean, the whole thing that we're trying to achieve by putting feeders in here using cell cameras is not having to go back into that property until
it's right.
It's we're wanting to hunt it, and so by putting solar panels on our cell cameras and by getting the biggest feeders possible that we can get back in there, we're able to stay off the property as much as possible.
Well, and what's leaning me towards maybe us using a spin feeder in this case is the fact that we then, on a time basis, release a certain amount of food every day versus the
Makes
on-demand.
It's more predictable, too. It's like, okay, we know every month and a half we're going to have to go fill this thing up.
Yeah, and all of them are synced up like that, right? Whereas if it's an on-demand, if there's 50 does hitting one feeder, they may drain that thing 4 weeks before they drain this other one.
Well, and we were considering, too, the only real downfall that we see to a spin feeder is like potentially non-targets. It's putting that corn on the ground so you can have coons,
squirrels, everything,
else.
Which are going to set off your cell camera and potentially eat battery out.
Coming in and doing that. And also, it limits the amount of food that's put out. And so if you've got a lot of deer or, I don't know, a specific deer that's just a hog is wanting to eat all of it, he doesn't have that option. And it's just, we've never used a spin feeder. I personally haven't. We've always done the gravity feeders, and those have worked fairly well. But the things that you said, the buck's not wanting to come in as their testosterone levels are rising and be head to head at something like that, I think is very valid. And the fact that that's probably one of the biggest ones. That really.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I mean, I've seen the reluctancy even in July and August in velvet because you got to think when that deer's in velvet, it's extreme ultra sensitive touch on those velvet antlers, and so as it's approaching a protein feed or even a homemade feeder, anytime it bangs or touches something, like that deer freaks out, doesn't want to do that. But as those harden out and then testosterone levels are rising at the same time, now they don't want to be around other bucks, which early in September, per when we potentially could be hunting here and maybe killing a buck, they're still going to be in bachelor groups likely. So, these are the kind of things that maybe get overlooked when people are thinking about how they're going to hunt. We may have a whole different situation here in September hunting and trying to kill a buck than we will in November when I don't even see the deer come to a feeder because all they care about is chasing does around.
Yeah. And we don't know either. I mean, this is just our speculation as to how this is going to work. Time will tell. But I think that that fact there that we just were talking about, and also the fact that we can regulate the amount of feed that's getting taken out or put out by that feeder, is going to make those a winner for us.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the goal here is if we can fill up a big feeder, it can be released at a controlled rate, and we don't have to touch that thing for 90 days. It's a win for us.
Yep.
Right?
So the next question is, how do you get them in there? We
Well,
had a
don't
hard
know.
enough time getting our machine in there. Well, Frank, we didn't get into the north side of the property. There's a lot of cutting and stuff that needs to happen, but I think we're going to make another trip down there in the summer with
We've got a strategy
with
there.
a couple of big feeders, and we're going to try to get them in there.
I mean, you almost have to. I don't doubt that in November you could sit in there and really have an ability to catch rutting bucks moving back and forth, on those ridges and those benches and those saddles. But if we want to have a chance of killing a deer anywhere between the opening day in September to early October, I think those feeders are going to be critical. And for us, and I feel like you and I maybe harp on this, and it's probably because lessons learned. Listen, if there's not a big buck in there, we aren't going to kill them. Right. And so for anything, it's to get these in place to just tell me there's a big one in there. If there's one in there, guess what? We're in the game.
Yeah.
And I feel like far too often, and maybe even this year, we spent a lot of time hunting where we were not in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really love to hear from some guys that have a similar hunting style, because you and I are used to places where you can plant food plots, and that's kind of our go-to in terms of establishing habitat. We're doing chainsaw work. We're putting food plots in if we can. We don't have those opportunities here, and I know there's guys that are in the same boat. And it's some, I assume, that are doing it successfully. So we're going to try it. I mean, this is our move for right now, but I'm interested to hear if there's other guys that are having success on feeders in places like Kentucky.
Yeah, I think one thing that kind of that's a great question, because I think that there's a lot of things that line up on that side that I'm always curious about. I think I not necessarily lived, I more died by the trail camera last year in terms of when I picked a hunt and where I picked a hunt. I know a lot of guys, and I'm sure there's plenty of guys that are listening to this and being like, yeah, you guys, you're not hunters. You're feeding and using cell cameras. And it's like, yeah, cool, man. Like, I completely get that. That's, I'm going to use the technology to my advantage. I'm going to do whatever's legal in the state to be able to harvest a big buck. But I guess, in that same right, it's kind of like, well, how do you know there's a big buck where you're hunting if you're not doing some of those things?
Sure.
Right? Are you just purely going off sign? Or are you scouting fields?
There's value to that stance as well. I mean, if I just have one farm that I'm going to hunt regardless of what's there, and I'm just trying to kill a buck or whatever.
Yeah, but that's not what we're doing.
It is what it is. But the fact of it is that this property is far away from us. Not only do we not have the time to sit down there the entire season, I don't want to spend more time away from my wife or our responsibilities. Like, we've got things to do, and as much as I love to hunt, like, I want to hunt less and be more effective with the time that I am hunting. And to combat that, I mean, we've obviously planned on picking up some licenses and stuff in several states. So, like, we're going to spend a considerable amount of time hunting, but
should be less time in
inevitably,
each space.
I want to be most effective with the time that we are spending in the woods as possible.
I mean, I think that, and again, there's always that thing in the back of my head just because of growing up not being able to bait, in Pennsylvania, to then go to baiting, and it's like, that's not how but I mean, look at this whole trip. We probably read sign more than anything.
Sure.
Like, here's the trails where they're going, here's the old rubs, here's old scrapes. Like, you're not completely just going out and saying, okay, cool, I'm going to drop this feeder right here, and I'm going to bring every deer in this area to this spot. I mean, we've got 200 pounds of corn in a trophy rock sitting behind a barn. There hasn't been a deer that has been on that in over a week.
Sure.
So it's...
and I mean...
It's
you
hard
could take
to
a less
imagine
apologetic approach to it and say, dude, I'm going to do anything
whatever I want.
necessary within the legal spectrum to get these deer found and killed. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. And so,
to each their own.
Well, to each their own, and it's also every place is different.
Yeah.
And so
we're not doing this in
Illinois. We can't take
Illinois.
advantage of stuff like this, in Pennsylvania, for example,
Yeah.
Or in places like North Dakota. Like every hunt is different, and in the same way that we're, targeting different animals based off the opportunities that are there, we're also taking advantage of different hunting styles based off the legal regulations that exist there as well.
I think the big thing is that, as we look at a place like this, we're going to show a ton of different hunting strategies, successes, failures, with the spectrum of places that we'll be hunting this year. I truly believe that even though I have a little bit more access to this property, being that I'm in Kentucky a lot, it will be the most challenging piece of property we have. I do not think that we'll have a shortage of big bucks to hunt. I just think that killing them and getting on them is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
I think that a property like Kansas, and a property maybe in like our new Ohio lease, probably set up a lot easier for us to get on deer and get in them and hunt them successfully.
Sure.
So, and then you've got new places like Illinois and Indiana where, there is no baiting. So it'll just be cell cameras on scrapes or food plots or something else. And we're going to be out there tromping around and
super stoked to see what those properties have as well.
Yeah. So, I think that, this was kind of a really cool experience for us in that, we got to put a lot of time in a piece of property early in the year, and man, I still, as treacherous as it was with the snow and everything else, like seeing a property like that bare bones, I think you and I talked about it when we were walking out. You come back in that property in July and August, you won't be able to see 10 feet in front of you in half of those spots.
Yeah, this is the time to go. And actually, we chose to go down to Kentucky a little earlier than we were planning on going to Kansas and to Illinois because we don't think there's as much potential to find shed antlers on a place like this.
Yeah, we know there's bucks in there. Most of those bucks, are, at least on camera, are still holding. But, even if they do drop, it is literally a needle in the haystack.
Yeah, that's tough.
And who knows how far those deer are moving, where they're bedding. It's just, it would be really tough. So, yeah,
that's another advantage that I hope the feeders will give to us is if we can have deer on this property consistently and actually hold them, that opportunity to find those shed antlers is probably greater. And so next year may be a different deal for that.
Yeah, I think so too. So, yeah, man, I think a good wrap there on the third podcast here for us. We do have shed hunts coming up here in the near future, and in Kansas and Illinois on a trip around there. Seems like we've got a potential development in South Dakota as well that we'll probably be addressing here, maybe to do call it the Dakota Double for mule deer this fall.
Yeah, really cool. And we're still figuring that out. We just dipped our toe in some research yesterday to find out that South Dakota doesn't require preference points for non-resident archery hunters.
For deer.
For mule deer.
Yeah.
And we're still figuring out, I think there's a few different stipulations and maybe different areas and stuff like
Time
that.
frames for public land versus private land.
Yeah, the season opening dates has recently changed too, so I don't think non-resident archery deer hunters can hunt public land now until October 1st, but we can hunt private land on September 1st. And so I think what we're going to try to do is align that with North Dakota, which we did last year, which is also September 1st. And that's the kicker with North Dakota is you do have to get drawn. It's about a 50-50 odds that happens, so we're hopeful. And if we can make that happen in conjunction with, we've got a connection to a landowner in South Dakota potentially, we might double down in the Dakotas this year.
Dakota Double for muleys. Cool. That'd be awesome.
But I think to leave a note on this property is this is just kind of the inception here. It's our first time on this property. It's really just kind of a theory, a game plan, a hope, and a dream at this point.
Yeah.
Hopefully later this summer we'll be able to circle back, having done some work, got some feeders into this place, maybe got some more some bucks on camera at that point. But this is just kind of the beginning of this story of this Kentucky property, and I'm anxious to see what it has for us.
Yeah, the only downfall as we get warmer, though, I think we're all looking forward to some warm weather here, is it is a known snaky area.
That's right.
And so, between copperheads and rattlesnakes, I'm sure at some point we're going to run into them.
Hope you got some strong lips.
Yeah. I'm not sucking any venom out of you. That's just not going to happen. But is that my payback for you lifting it off of my foot? Oh, man, that's a tough gig there. But no, I think that as we kind of get further into this, we'll probably do some turkey hunting on that as well. We'll learn a lot more about that property, but I'm very confident there'll be no shortage of big bucks on there. I am confident that it'll be tough to hunt, but I think ultimately, that's why we do it. I don't want it necessarily to be easy. I want to be able to go out there and say, we achieved something that few do. Yeah. So, but yeah, man, we'll kind of end it there. We appreciate you listening to the third Hunter podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Right on.
Take me on down the river where the guilt can't find.